Hello, my name is Emily Crow from The Cozy Crow and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to talk about everything that I read in January and all the things I hope to read in February. If you are new to my channel, welcome so much. I've previously done a lot of yarn content on here, but I also am a big reader, so I'm trying to delve more into the bookish content as well. So that's what this video is, just to do kind of a wrap up of how January went, as well as looking to the future in February. And I don't hold myself super strongly to my TBRs. I kind of see what's available at the library, what piques my interest in the moment. And so while I have an idea of the things I'd like to get through, it's still a mystery, so you'll have to come back again next month and see what I actually ended up reading. But for the month of January, I read 15 books, which is wild. That's way more than I anticipated. I feel like it was not a big reading month for me. I feel like I spent a lot more of my energy knitting and crocheting and watching YouTube and things like that, but I actually got a lot of reading in too, which is really cool. A couple shorter things, but also definitely some longer books. I'm trying to build my attention span and not limit myself to just short reads I can get through pretty quick. I'm excited to share with you everything that I read because there is quite a variety. You might be able to hear I'm slightly under the weather still. I had laryngitis last week, so that's why this video I'm filming a little bit later than I would have liked. So I literally could not talk at all. It was really bad, and so could not do any filming because you couldn't even hear my voice. So I'm feeling a lot better now, still like slightly not 100%, but I honestly feel pretty good, and I'm excited to be sharing with you all the things that I read. I'm surrounded by books here, so let's just jump right into it. I've got my reading journal here so I can look at the ratings that I gave and the order that I read the books. Definitely let me know down below if there's a specific order you want me to share the books I read in. Currently, I'm just gonna go from start to finish throughout the month what I read, but if you want to know in order of the star ratings I gave, or if you want me to organize it by any other particular way, like shortest book to longest book, anything like that, just let me know down below and we can kind of mix it up on future months. But we'll start with the very beginning of my month and what I finished first. The first book that I finished in January was actually a novella called Phantom Pond by Juneau. I rated this 3.75 stars. I love this series. It's a cozy mystery centered around some woodland critters. It is so cute. Like, it is as cute as you think. And I've read most of the backlog of this series last year, but I had not quite finished this novella. This is set around Samhain, Halloween time, though they have their own little Halloween, Samhain-esque holiday that they celebrate. Basically, a little girl goes missing. They try to figure out what happened to her. And it's just a cute little novella. This story, unlike the other mysteries, had less mystery to it. It ended up being less sinister. So even though you might be like, oh my goodness, a small child is missing, this story definitely built more on the lore of the region that all these like woodland critters live in. So that was just interesting. It was different. I liked it. It was fun. It was very much focused on vibes. So if you're looking for a cozy read to read in the autumn time or around Halloween or Samhain, this would be a great little read for you. And that was a little ebook that I just purchased for my Kindle, just a couple bucks, and it was just a fun little read. I do a mix of audiobooks, ebooks, physical books. I do also do audiobooks for books I have physical copies of. I just get through a lot more audiobooks with all my driving for work and listening while I'm exercising or doing chores or whatnot. And so I have quite a few books to share with you, and I'll try to mention whether I read it on ebook, audiobook, physical copy, did a mix, etc. So you can kind of see the breakdown of how I do my reading, because it is honestly a lot of audiobooks. The next book I read was a physical book, actually. Always in December by Emily Stone. This is a holiday romance, though it's a sad one. It definitely ripped my heart out at the end. And this book involves this girl who is still kind of recovering from the grief of losing her parents like 20 years ago. She writes them a little letter, doesn't address it to a specific address or put postage on it or anything, but she puts it in the mailbox every single year to send this letter kind of out into the nethers for her parents, which I think is a really, really sweet sentiment. And as she's trying to drop off her letter, This year, she runs into this guy. So let's see these characters. Josie is the girl and Max is the guy. They run into each other and they end up sparking this like emotional closeness, and they get to know each other over a few days. It ends up kind of becoming a fling, and then he disappears and he's gone. And she's like, I thought that this would be maybe something more, but he's totally shut that down. So she tries to move on with her life, and they keep running into each other like multiple times over the course of the year. So you kind of hear about missed connections. One of them's dating one person, one of them's dating another. There's a little bit of miscommunication, that original fling that they had, and the lack of closure and what that has impacted on the relationship. It was very real and it's interesting to read about, but it definitely didn't give you like happy romance vibes throughout. It was a little bit tense as you're trying to figure out like, are they gonna end up together? What's gonna actually kind of tip the scales for them? So if you're looking for a happy holiday romance, this is not the one. I rated this 3.5 stars. The characterization was a little bit inconsistent. I felt like her grief was swallowing her whole 20 years after her parents died at the very beginning of the book. But then towards the end of the book, she was a lot more confident in herself and like was at a very healthy place in her grief, where it still existed, of course, but it wasn't consuming her. And it just felt like there was a big gap. Also, I feel gypped because I thought this would be a cute, happy holiday romance, and it wasn't. So maybe I was a little bit mean, but I would definitely read from this author again. I'm going to see if any of her other winter holiday romances are also in the same strain of sadness, or if some of them are happy. I do have one other one on my physical TBR that I'll probably get to closer to Christmas time this year. I just wanted to finish this book up because I had started it around Christmas. I needed to finish it. There are definitely some holiday vibes, but not like super duper strongly, but there are some for sure at the beginning of the book and the end of the book. The next book that I read was my first 5-star of 2024. This is Circe by Madeline Miller. This book has been out for a while, but I finally read it because I was at least on the periphery of 3 different book clubs that were reading this book for January. So I made a point to read it. I did not attend any of those book clubs, but at least I read this book. This is a Greek retelling of Circe, who is the daughter of a nymph and Helios, the god of the sun. She seems kind of naive, just like she's young. She is not world weary. And she ends up being exiled for some of the choices that she makes from her father's house. And so she's exiled to this island. And this story is the story of her growth as she comes into her own, to her powers, as she interacts with people who come to her island, and as she kind of decides what's important for herself and what she's willing to fight for. It's a really good book. I love Greek myth retellings. I can't even talk. Oh my gosh. I love Greek retellings in general. I love hearing about all these side characters that you don't get much of a glimpse of in the classic stories, and also seeing the names and like cameos of other characters that you are familiar with. I think that's really cool. And I love how this kind of expands on the canon and gives more meaning to those characters. This book is beautifully written, like super lyrical and poetic, just gorgeous to listen to. I really liked how Circe had some solid growth as a character, but it also was varied. It wasn't linear or super abrupt. It was very natural, made sense, but also was positive, if that makes sense. She came into her own. I also really liked how the themes of this book were subtle, but also definitely prevalent and easy to spot. It wasn't like they were hidden and you have to reread this book multiple times in order to get the point of what the author's trying to say. You can definitely tell, but it's not heavy-handed either. I think it was a really good blend. Everything was right about this book. I just feel like I listened to it while I was in a slump. I may have listened to it too fast because I was just trying to get through it because I was in a slump. So I feel like I need to reread this book because I would get so much more out of it. But it did everything right. Everything was great about it. It deserves 5 stars, and I need to reread it for sure when I'm in a better mindset to really internalize some of the things that are here and to really get a lot from this reading. So I highly recommend that you read this. I think if I do a reread, because I did this on audiobook, that I would read this in physical form, because then that would force me to slow down a little bit more and give more thought to my reading. And I think that would lend itself to getting more out of it as well. The next book that I read, also an audiobook, and I actually purchased this book after I did the audiobook because I really, really enjoyed it. This is Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel, and I've read a few of her other books. I really enjoyed Station 11, even though I was in the midst of the pandemic when I read it, and so maybe it like hit me harder because of that. But I really like how her books in general have like a little bit of a sci-fi element. It's like an alternate reality compared to us. We're like, what if there was this massive pandemic? Or what if this one thing happened that kind of changed the course of humanity a little bit? Really cool. I really like that style. I like her writing a lot. The prose is very poetic and it's beautiful to listen to. This is also a pretty short book. I think it was like a 6-hour audiobook, maybe. This book in particular is a time travel story where you get glimpses of the same place but in different centuries as people are hearing this weird sound of a violin playing and an airship terminal. So like, I guess picture like an airport before spaceships type of thing. So there's this weird eerie noise that pops up in multiple different centuries in this exact same spot. And so you hear a little bit about a handful of people in each of these centuries that like hear that noise and how that weird paranormal instance has affected them. Like it was included in a journal writing from someone in like the 1800s, and it was the inspiration for like a music video type of thing that an artist put together. And there's just like interesting points of contact. You find out that there's this time traveler, Gaspard Robert, who is from the future trying to figure out why this anomaly happened. And basically you don't want anomalies in the space-time continuum because those can be dangerous and have big implications in the long term. So he works for this agency that's trying to figure out what is going on with this anomaly. So he travels to the different time periods, meets the people that interact with this anomaly, and tries to figure out what's going on. I rated this a 4.5 star. I just wanted a little bit more of the characters. There were a few characters that you get a lot of depth for, but also there's a lot of supporting characters that you don't see a lot of depth for. I really like how this time travel is handled. It's very digestible and manageable. There's still some time travel trippiness going on, which is the point of time travel, but I felt like the trippiness was totally understandable and didn't make your brain hurt too much, so you could still enjoy the story and see how things kind of piece together, but also still have some questions because you don't know the answers to everything, which I really, really liked. I feel like this was a perfect like introductory time travel type of a novel. I really enjoyed this, and as you see different centuries, you hear about different instances like Easter eggs from other books by Emily St. John Mandel, which is also fun. I really love this. It was so fun to listen to. I just wish there was a little bit more, and it would have been a 5 star. Okay, the next book that I listened to is called Killer Instincts by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This was an audiobook that I listened to from my library. This book is the second book in a series of young adult crime thrillers. So picture like Criminal Minds or like NCIS or something like that. But there are teenagers with special abilities that are really helpful for the FBI in trying to locate serial killers and trying to solve crimes. In the first couple books, they're trying to practice their skills on like cold cases and things. Unfortunately, they also kind of get roped into current day mysteries and murders as well. There's some danger for them. There's definitely some like questions of like who they can trust, etc., etc. This book specifically, there is a murder for a college student, but it seems like whoever killed this girl was copying a very famous serial killer. And so we're trying to figure out throughout this book, are they connected to this serial killer that's in jail? Are they just trying to mimic them? What exactly is the relationship and how big does this go? And you find out that there's a personal connection to one of the kids that is in this naturals program, and he's got a personal stake in things. It was enjoyable. It's a YA novel. It definitely reads a little bit younger on the YA side. I rated it a 3.75 because I really enjoy reading about this like serial killer, solving crime type of scenario. I haven't read any other books like it, and so that's been really fun. But there's like this love triangle between characters, and there's a lot of immaturity between these teenagers as they're like not listening to the authority figures and doing stupid stuff and whatnot. So sometimes the characters get a little annoying, but if you can suspend your disbelief that like these teenagers are in these situations, then it's actually just like a fun, nice palate cleanser. There are 4 books in the series. Like I said, this is the second one. I definitely look forward to reading the 3rd and 4th. It seems like, based on the conclusion of this book, the relationships between the characters and the relationships between the characters and the crime scenes is going to change quite a bit compared to the first 2 books. And so I'm excited to see that change, but I'm not super compelled to continue this series. We'll see when I get to the next book. But overall, it's enjoyable. I recommend. Nothing super amazing, but it's a good book, a good palate cleanser. The next book that I read was a novella. This was an ebook that I borrowed from my library called This Winter by Alice Oseman, and this is in the Solitaire Heartstopper universe. I read all 5 volumes of Heartstopper at the end of last year. I blew through them very fast, and I really enjoyed them. I found that I didn't like this novella quite as much. I rated it a 4 star, so still a really good rating, but I just really like how Alice Oseman structures her graphic novels. The art and the pacing of the graphic novel adds to the story, whereas I feel like in this novella it was missing a little bit of that. But still, a good story. I think this takes place in the middle of, I think, is it volume 4? This series is about 2 young men in high school who end up dating, exploring their identities, falling in love, all that good stuff. And you see how they evolve as people during such a transformative time of their lives in like the end of high school, and they go through all sorts of issues that you see with like homophobia, bullying, insensitive family and friends sometimes, mental health, eating disorders, all sorts of issues are like wrapped up in these books. And I feel like the way that Alice Oseman tackles these is really powerful, and I definitely recommend them, especially if you are in this YA age group and going through some of your own challenges in those realms. I feel like this would help you to see like healthy coping mechanisms and ways to transverse struggles like these, and also find some solidarity in these characters and some understanding in maybe yourself too. So highly recommend anything in that like Solitaire Heartstopper universe. In this novella specifically, one of the 2 boys is just coming home from being inpatient in a mental hospital, and it was a good experience for him. I mean, it was really hard, but coming from the lowest point that he's ever been at in learning some coping techniques, meeting with professionals who understood what he was going through, he felt like he was coming out more prepared to have like a level of maintenance in his mental health. So he was still in a, fragile is not like the right word, but he was still in like a tenuous state mental health wise, but he was on the up and up and had been practicing some skills and feeling confident about like moving into the real world again and kind of adding on more challenges and responsibilities outside of being inpatient, where his only focus was his mental health. It's Christmas time, so the extended family's around. He already has strained relationships with some of his immediate family, and then there's some insensitive family members, and it's a really hard experience. And so you get to explore that with them as they kind of reevaluate their relationships and what their responsibility is to advocate for themselves when other people are being insensitive versus letting other people advocate for them versus like setting boundaries and just coming back later when it's a more appropriate time to advocate, things like that. And so you kind of see this exploration for this character, and as they're seeing who is a really good and understanding support for them and who is trying to learn and become a good support versus those who are not trying at all. And so it was an interesting character study in the lens of this holiday party for their extended family. I really liked it. I think it's worth reading for sure, especially if, like I said before, you would identify with any of the struggles that these characters face. And if you're in this stage of life, I think it's really beneficial. And it's also important if you are not part of those minorities that you understand those kinds of experiences. I definitely like her graphic novels more, but I do think this novella is worth a read. The next book that I read was an audiobook. This is Shark Heart, a Love Story by Emily Habeck. And this book, I rated it a 4.5 star. I enjoyed it. It's a magical realism, alternate reality to us. Like, it is normal everyday life, except the only thing is there are these medical mutations that people have, like a genetic disease, where they turn into animals. And so the main characters in this book, Ren and Lewis, they just got married. They're both a little bit quirky, weird people, but they found their person, they got married. There's a lot of hope in their marriage, looking forward to a life together and like exploring that life together. And then Lewis gets diagnosed pretty quickly after that with a mutation that he is turning into a great white shark. It's an aggressive mutation, so it'll be a pretty quick transformation. This world is strange because everyone accepts that these mutations are, while very uncommon, are part of everyday life. So there are doctors specific to these mutations. There's research centers, there's medications you can do to kind of make the transition less painful and like a little bit easier as you are transitioning from a human into an animal. So very strange in how like the way that this book handled it made it very realistic. So that was like a little trippy, and sometimes I forget that I was reading about a terminal illness of turning into a shark rather than some other terminal illness. And I think that was the point, which I really appreciated. It made me think a lot about myself and my interactions with the world and how I view terminal illness and how I would respond to a loved one having terminal illness. So it gave me a lot to think about, and I really do enjoy books that make me think in like the general fiction lit fic type of realm. So I did really like this. I felt like though the second half of this book felt a little tangential to like the main point of the rest of the book. And by the end of the second half, you kind of see why it's all tied together, but it also feels like most of the second half of this book could have been truncated into a much smaller portion of the book. Like, I don't know why it took up half the book. I either missed something or I just didn't connect with that story as much, or like the purpose of that story being included in here. It's basically split into mostly two parts. There's like a backstory of Ren's mother as she's growing up and having a teen pregnancy, things like that. And then having Ren too. There's definitely some parallels. So it's not like it's totally out of left field, but it also felt like it was longer than it needed to be to tell the story that the second half of this book was meaning to tell, if that makes sense. But 4.5 star, definitely recommend it, especially if you like things that are a little bit wacky, a little bit magical realism, but also very relatable and human. Very beautifully written. And this is a debut, I think, so I'm excited to see what else she comes up with. The next book I read was a physical book. I read Bookshops and Bonedust by Travis Baldree. This is the second book / prequel to Legends and Lattes. In this book, Viv, this orc, is brand new at adventuring. She's just recently joined a party, and on a campaign, she gets injured. And she gets left behind in a very small town to heal up while the rest of her party goes and finishes their campaign. So she's really bummed about that. She feels stuck in this small town. There's nothing to do. She's bored. She's hurting as she's not up to her like physical prowess that she normally is at as she's healing from her injury, etc., etc. So that kind of sets the stage for this book. I love the cast of characters. It's perfect Dungeons and Dragons or like RPG vibes if you love that kind of thing, like that high fantasy, you know, with like orcs. This is like a ratkin, a rat species that like is sentient and like bigger than normal rats, and like, you know, this one is running a bookshop. Super fun. And it's just The vibes are so good. This is perfect cozy high fantasy where you've got small town vibes, bookshop vibes. Viv is trying to bide her time and she comes to really love these people that she's interacting with. You also see a first love story. So that's really sweet to see the beginning of that. And you see how Viv helps, what's the ratkin's name? I don't know, Fern. I think Fern is her name. So Viv helps Fern, this ratkin, in trying to optimize her bookstore, kind of get it cleaned up, reorganized, promote her bookstore so she can stay afloat. So she's helping save a bookstore, if you love save a bookstore trope. So really sweet. But also underlying this whole story is this adventuring story where it also ties into the campaign she was on before she got injured. A really great balance of high fantasy with really cozy vibes, the underlying adventuring subplot, but also there were a lot of other things going on that made every second of reading this book so enjoyable. This is my favorite book of the month, a 5-star for sure. I would love to read more from him. I like this better than Legends and Lattes because I feel like the balance between the high fantasy adventure subplot and the rest of the story was better and more consistent throughout this book compared to Legends and Lattes, where it felt like that adventuring subplot was kind of like thrown in a couple random spaces and was less contiguous, if that makes sense. Highly recommend. Such an enjoyable read. We're about halfway through my list. The next book that I listened to was Red, White, and Royal Blue. This is by Casey McQuiston, and it is a contemporary romance involving a hypothetical son of the President of the United States and hypothetical Prince of England. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. I loved the banter. I love these characters. They were really vibrant as characters and really diverse. There's a lot of diversity in this book too, which I appreciated. And I really enjoyed the political aspect of the subplots in teaching me things and making me think about politics, actually. So that was interesting and something I don't think about a ton. But also it was in a very digestible, manageable way that even though I haven't thought about politics deeply in a while, I was still able to enjoy, and it didn't feel like it was too much. It was like a really nice, solid subplot, and it made the romance have more depth as well. I don't know what it's called, because a sapphic romance is 2 girls. 2 guys. I honestly did really like this, though I felt like this book was a little bit long, and part of that was because the middle third of this book, these 2 characters were just thirsting after each other and would like sneak away to spend time together. And there was lots of spicy scenes in the middle of this book. And it just felt like, okay, I get the point. You guys are thirsty, but like, let's move on. It did feel like there was a lot of spicy scenes in the middle of the book and they didn't necessarily expand on the plot or add to the plot. And I feel like some of those could have been taken out and the book could have been a little bit shorter, especially in that middle part where it just felt like all they were doing was hooking up over and over again and finding ways to meet up with each other and hook up. I didn't mind the spicy scenes, but in the middle especially felt like there was too much and not enough plot in the middle. That was my only gripe. It was almost a 5-star. I really did enjoy it and I definitely recommend. The next audiobook that I listened to was Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. Yes, I started on the Sarah J. Maas train and I decided to start with Throne of Glass because the series is complete already. I feel like I've heard this is maybe like YA. It's like a new adult book. I definitely liked where it was coming from with new adult characters like the 18 plus, but still on the younger side. Definitely more mature than a YA, but also not super intense and mature either. I really enjoyed this book. I also rated this a 4.5 star. This is a story about Selena, who is an assassin, and she has been imprisoned for her crimes. She's pulled from captivity to compete in a contest to be the king's champion. So she competes with 23 other people that have been selected, and they're all like thugs and riffraff and, you know, all sorts of slightly sketchy people. She's the only girl, but she's awesome. And so it's really cool hearing how cool she is. And there's definitely some hints at there's more to her story than is in this book. So it kind of keeps you intrigued, wanting to learn more. I love seeing her relationships develop with some people that are in the castle at this time. the prince, a visiting princess, the captain of the guard. And so it was really interesting to see this cast of characters start to build. And I definitely really enjoyed this book and can see that this is going to lead to quite the series. So I'm glad the books are already out because I feel like I can just read at my leisure and I don't have to worry about like what's going to happen after this. There wasn't really a cliffhanger, though it definitely was looking towards the future in the next book. So I'm excited to read the next book. We'll see when I get to that. I did really enjoy this though, and I'm happy to get into the series. The next book I listened to was Dune Messiah by Frank Herbert, and man, this book was written in the 60s. You can tell. I did enjoy it. First and foremost, I rated it 3.75 star. The Dune series, if you haven't seen the movie or read the books, definitely considered a classic sci-fi series. In the first book, Paul Atreides is part of this noble family that gets placed on this planet to kind of run things, and then they get betrayed, overthrown. So Paul goes into hiding after his father is killed. He interacts with the local indigenous people and learns their ways. They see him as like a religious figure that there have been prophecies about. And there's also political people that have prophecies about him being a political figure in the universe. And so like these prophecies are converging, etc., etc. This is the second book in the series, and this book takes place about 10 years after the first book ends, give or take, where Paul has been the emperor of the universe for like 10 years now. He's becoming kind of disillusioned. The local people still see him as like a messiah figure, but there's a large weight to that and the implications of having that mantle on him. But also he's literally the king of the universe, and so there's a lot of implications and weight to having that mantle placed on him. And so he's trying to wrestle with these different roles that he's trying to play and trying to keep everyone happy and like have control over everything. But he's also realizing that the outcomes of his choices to like maintain control and be the emperor is not necessarily something he's proud of. And he doesn't really like where things are going. And so this book is full of some political intrigue as there's people throughout the universe trying to sabotage him. There's a lot of personal exploration on Paul's part as he's trying to figure out like how he can avoid some visions he's had of destruction of the universe, but also try to maintain his own relationships. And it's hard to kind of balance all the different possible outcomes that he's seen and, you know, trying to balance his own wants with the things that his empire needs kind of thing. So pretty interesting and very convoluted, honestly. There are a lot of books in the series, and I think Frank's son has also expanded this universe and the canon in this series. So there's a lot to delve into. It is sci-fi. The way that this sci-fi is written very much assumes that you understand what's happening. And so it takes a while to really understand who everyone is and why it's important. And that's just kind of the way it's written. I also feel like this book, it was the perfect length for the message it set out to give. So I really liked that. But I also felt like if I read this book 5 more times, I'll get a lot more out of it and I'll understand a lot more of the subtle themes and messages. But I don't know if I want to read this book 5 more times. I might read it a couple more times in my life, but I just feel like if most of the benefit of this classic is in rereading it over and over again, and I miss a lot of the value because I don't reread it over and over again, I feel like maybe things are too subtle, and that's my personal preference. But I do recommend, and if you do like sci-fi and you like this world, even though some things get really weird because it is sci-fi, then definitely explore, dive in. There's a lot of really interesting things, especially seeing how so many different facets kind of fit together in this story. It's an interestingly crafted story. You might have to reread multiple times to get a lot out of this book in like a depth sense, which you might enjoy. I just don't know if I want to read books at this time in my life that require me to study them, if that makes sense. I don't mind thinking a little bit, but having to study a book may be too much to ask for this little brain right now that's overwhelmed with reality. The next book that I read, I finished this on audiobook, but I did a little bit ebook, a little bit audiobook because I got both copies from my library at about the same time, and so I just switched back and forth. This is Check and Mate by Hazelwood, and it is about a recent high school graduate whose name is Mal, who has a past in playing chess, and you kind of hear inklings that like something to do with her father's not around anymore, something to do with her father, she doesn't play chess anymore. Very adamant, even though she was a prodigy when she was playing. She is working kind of a dead-end job, trying to make ends meet to help out her family, and she's just like overly stressed and also not really fulfilling her potential as she's trying to bear so much burden for her family. So all this is going on, and then unexpectedly she gets thrust back into the chess world. This is her opportunity to make money for her family. So she does it. She doesn't want to, and she ends up being, again, still a genius at chess, and there's a romance involved with Nolan, who is the #1 chess player in the world, of course. And you see their relationship kind of ebb and flow and develop, and see her growth in the chess world throughout this book. This is YA. I didn't really like it. This was my lowest rated book of the year so far. 2.75, 2.5 star, and I'll tell you why. Though some people really like this book. This is my first Hazelwood book, so I'm not sure. I'll have to try an adult book by her and see how I like it. But for this book, I did not like Mal. I felt like she was trying to do too many grown-up things with an immature brain. So she would make YA decisions and be YA immature, but try to do grown-up things like provide for her family and like take care of her sisters and stuff. And I did not like reading about that. It was so annoying. I don't mind characters having some depth and having to grow up a little younger because of some hard things in their lives, but she did not seem like she was grown up. She was just trying hard without growth. And so she did so many stupid things, and she was like running away from conflict, like literally running away from conflict. She just seemed really immature. Also, this book, there was such a dissonance between Mal's character and Nolan's character. Nolan was sweet. He was like instantly in love with her. I didn't really see why. I couldn't see that. I didn't see the chemistry between them. They just seemed like on different levels and different stages of their lives because she was just still really immature in a lot of ways. Also, this is a YA book, so there weren't explicit sex scenes, but this book was strangely sexual for being YA and not showing those like intimate moments. So I think it focused too much on that and not enough on the emotional intimacy between Nolan and Mal, and so I didn't really see the chemistry between them, honestly. And I liked the chess aspect. I feel like that was unique and it taught me a lot. It was interesting to read about, but I also feel like it was very superficial, and I think part of that was because Mal was totally OP and like so good and beating everyone all over the place, so you didn't really get a lot of depth or a lot of tension related to the chess, and so that was a big part of the book, but like it wasn't very deep either. So I don't know, there were some things I liked, but overall I did not enjoy this book. It was not for me, but it might be for you. I don't know. If you've read multiple books by Hazelwood, let me know how you feel like Check and Mate compared to her adult novels, and we'll see. I'll have to try one of her adult novels and see if I like her as an author, or if she's a romance author I'm gonna pass on because it's not worth my time. I don't really know. The next book that I listened to is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne, and this is a reread. I did read this when this first came out, and I love this book. Like a 4.75, almost a 5 star. If you haven't seen the new movie that came out, this book is about Coriolanus Snow, so the President Snow that you hear about in the original Hunger Games trilogy, and it's not like his villain backstory, but it's a very pivotal time in his life where he's graduating high school, preparing to go to university. His family is destitute, so he's really trying to win scholarships to go to university and further his education and like make something of himself in the broad world. And so he is a mentor in the Hunger Games for the 10th annual Hunger Games, and he is trying to produce ideas for the Hunger Games to make them more popular amongst the crowd, to kind of raise more money for the Hunger Games, while he's also trying to find his place in this capital world where some things are like not quite right, but also he feels like he needs to act a certain way and put on a certain show for other people too. So it's really interesting, definitely an in-depth character study, as he's mentoring Lucy Gray Baird from District 12 and the relationship that they develop and his conflicts between like supporting the Capitol and supporting her, and just all the fallout from that experience, like consequences for his actions and whether or not he feels like that was the path he ultimately wanted to take, and kind of like reflecting on his decisions, and also kind of like making goals and plans to still salvage his future. It was really interesting as a character study. It's definitely on the slower side as a character study type of a book, but in the book compared to the movie, you see a lot more of that internal struggle and conflict and just duplicity within himself as he's trying to reconcile like all the things that he's thinking and feeling. He's not necessarily like tortured, but he's just trying to balance like him as a successful person, but also trying to be a good person, but also seeing where he draws the line between being a good person and being a successful person. And it's really interesting to read about. My only thing is, in the climax of this book, between him and Lucy Gray Baird at the very end, it just feels like both of those characters kind of flipped a switch. And while most of the book you saw some really great character development and progression, especially as you kind of see their characters shifting and maybe like drawing apart from one another, I feel like in that moment, the change was so great that I didn't really get on board with it. It seemed a little bit out of place. But honestly, this book was really good. At the end of last year, I rewatched all the Hunger Games movies and I reread all of the books in preparation for the movie. And I did not get to this one in time before I watched the movie. So I watched the movie without having reread the book, but it was okay. It made me want to reread the book still. And so I did, and I'm really glad I did. The next book that I listened to, man, I listened to a lot of books this month, was The Gentleman and the Thief by Sarah M. Eden. And this is the second book in the Dread Penny Society. It's a proper romance. So basically it takes place in, I think, 1860s, 1870s. So like Edwardian era England, where there's a group of men and a woman that you hear about in the first book that are part of the Dread Penny Society. And they sell their penny dreadful novels, stories, things like that, and use that money to help the poor. But not just like investing in the poor, but they're also like catching orphans off the street that have been wrangled by criminals to do bad things. And so they're like taking these street urchins and like putting them in schools and like stealing them away from bad guys. And so this book, it sounds like, oh yeah, like that's nice that they're doing that. But the series has a lot more going on with bad guys and like nefarious people that they run into in this world of like the 1860s. There's less justice related to law enforcement and crimes and things like that. And so like there's the threat of like being killed by these nefarious people anyway. So there's a lot more going on. Like the stakes are higher than you would think reading off the bat. This is the second book. You've seen both The Gentleman and the Thief in the first book of the series. And they're companion novels. I think that the overarching plot of like the criminals that they're trying to like disband their criminal activity, that you could have spoiled by reading these books out of order, because I feel like that plot runs throughout the entire series. But as far as like the romances and stuff, I don't think there's too much of a spoiler. I rated this book 3.75 star. I enjoyed it. It was a good palate cleanser. I liked these characters, but I wanted more. I wanted more of the characters. I wanted more romance. I feel like the plot of the like nefarious people, nefarious is my favorite word right now, that took more of a front seat than the romance in this book, which I feel like was a missed opportunity. And the third act conflict between these two characters as they're learning about each other, it resolved within like 2 pages. And so even though you're like, oh my goodness, what's gonna happen? And then you're like, oh, okay, it's fine. And so that lack of tension was really unsatisfying. A couple things could have made this book a lot better for me, but it was still a good book, good palate cleanser. Whenever I'm ready for just an easy read, I'll just listen to another audiobook of this. I think there's 5 books in the series. Just working my way through that series slowly. I do like historical novels in general, so historical romance is kind of fun to read about. The very last book that I finished in January was Emma by Jane Austen. Speaking of historical romances, and this takes place in like the 1810s, so like 50 years makes a big difference in the setting and in how the people interact with one another. So that's interesting to think about. But also, because this book was literally written in like the 1810s, it was really hard to get through. I started it in May last year and I just barely finished it. Oof. It was so hard to read more than like 10 or 15 pages at a time just because it is so dense. This is a long book. I think this might be Jane Austen's longest. It had a lot going on, but also like was a slower pace. And so it just felt like it took forever to get through. I feel like you got to listen to something like this on audiobook, or you need to be really familiar with the movie adaptations of books like this, or else you're never going to get through. And it still took me so long. I do really like the story of Emma. I rated it 4 stars, though maybe that was a little bit high, because I do really like the story, and I like seeing Emma's very flawed but realistic. I still like her a lot. Some people don't like Emma, but I really like this character. She's flawed but realistic, and you see her natural and subtle growth throughout the book as she's kind of growing up and changing and seeing the world a little bit differently and trying to be a better person. I like all that. It's nice and subtle. This is a satire, and it is really funny in moments, but the book is so long and dense that sometimes you miss out on those funny moments because you're just like trudging through the book, if that makes sense. So it's really helpful to already know about the story really well before you delve into this book so that you can kind of pick up on those moments. Same thing with like a William Shakespeare. Like, you might miss out on his comedies if you're not already familiar with the script or like adaptations of that play, but you get a lot more out of it by like viewing it in different mediums, if that makes sense. So I highly recommend that for Jane Austen stuff, especially. Maybe that's just how my brain works, but I love the Autumn de Wilde version of Emma that came out in, I think, 2020. I'm a fan. So yeah, I really like it. I would love to read through all of her backlist. I've read a couple of her books, but this one took so long and it was just hard to read through. And I work a lot of night shifts as a nurse, and so if I can't read a book on night shift when I'm like trying to stay awake, then this season of life, that book is not for me. And so this book, being a book that I only really read maybe like 5 or 10 pages at night sometimes, if I was feeling really awake, or reading like 10 to 20 pages when I was exercising on my exercise bike, a 400+ page book took forever to get through that way. 4 stars is probably a little high, honestly. I do really like Jane Austen's stuff though, and I like the subtlety of it, and I like the movie adaptations and the TV show adaptations that I've seen. I feel like I am a theater and film person in general. I see a lot of value in seeing things visually and how it can portray a different version of what you may know about the story already. I know some people are purists and love the book, but I feel like there's a lot of value to having those movie and show adaptations, especially for something that is as dense and a classic, but from a long, long time ago, like over 200 years ago, that can be a little bit inaccessible to understand. Those are the books that I read. Let me see how many I read on audio versus ebook versus physical books. So of the 15 books that I read in January, 3 of them I read on ebook. Though Check and Mate I read on ebook and audiobook, but I'm putting it in the ebook category. And then 3 of them I read physically. So that leaves 9 books that I listened to in January. So makes a big difference in my amount of reading to be able to do a lot of audiobooks. Highly recommend getting a library card, hooking it up with Libby, and seeing what's available. You can definitely get through a lot that way. So now that we've talked about everything that I read in January, let's talk a little bit about my TBR, or my books to be read in February. First, I want to talk about the 4 books that I've already started that I really hope to finish in the month of February. Let's see. First, this is a book that I'm hoping to do a vlog for here on my channel. This book is called A Stash of One's Own by Clara Parks. This is a book of maybe like 20 essays about stash, yarn stash, fiber stash, etc. that Clara Parks edited, put together. She also has an essay in here. And while I've enjoyed every essay I've read, it feels very one note in like the thoughts it has on stash. And so it's not very interesting because I feel like I'm reading the same thing over and over again. So it's been slow goings. I'm probably 2/3 of the way through, but I just need to be done. I have enjoyed it. Maybe I would recommend it. We shall see how it turns out because I've still got about 1/3 of the book left to read. I've got tons of tabs in here, mostly so that I could ask questions and interact with people on my Discord, and so that I could film that vlog that I'm working on. So check it out down below if you're interested in joining my book club Discord. I want to finish this so we can work on something else, maybe do a make along using a new release pattern book or something like that. So I would love to just finish this, be done with this. And then if I'm gonna pick another book about yarny things, hopefully it will have a little bit more variety and a little bit more story to it, so it's not so one note. The audiobook that I'm currently listening to is City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. This is my old copy. You can see that is gross. This is my old copy from when I was a teenager. I didn't ever read this book, but I want to get into the Shadowhunter series, and I really like how for the Shadowhunters, I love the covers and I love how the spines are that like black and white artistic look and how they all kind of flow together. I just really like that. So I'm reading this book now, trying to decide if I want to purchase the books or not. It is YA. It is slightly younger, slightly more immature than I typically like for YA. I'm wondering if the characters will grow up a little bit throughout the series. We shall see, but it is interesting. This is like a low fantasy, like there are these shadow hunters that kill demons that are amongst us in the world. And so Clary gets kind of pulled into this world, and she learns about this world that has been previously blocked off from her, but she may be a part of the world from the very beginning. Who knows? She's looking for her mom who has gone missing. She's worried about something horrible happening to her mom, and she's learning a lot about her mom that she didn't know previously and how it relates to this shadow hunter part of the world. So it's been interesting. I don't know why there's like a shirtless guy on the cover. It's interesting. I'm enjoying it. There are a lot of books in the Shadowhunters universe. So we'll see how fast I consume those and how much I like them, and if these characters grow up a little bit more, because I think I would like this series even more if the characters weren't like 15, 16 years old. I'm about 1/3 of the way through the book. It's like a 14-hour audiobook maybe. I can't quite remember. Just kind of chugging away at that. I'll probably finish that later this week because I've got a few shifts at the end of this week that I'll be driving all the way up to work for. So I'll get a lot of reading done in the next few days. My ebook that I'm currently reading, I like to have a physical book, an ebook, and an audiobook so that depending on where I am, I always have something I can read. My ebook is currently King of Scars by Leigh Bardugo. This is part of the Grishaverse, and I'm almost done getting through all of these books. I read the Six of Crows duology a couple years ago. I read Shadow and Bone trilogy last year. Now I want to read the King of Scars duology. It's just 2 books, which is nice. I do like duologies better than trilogies. I'm about 1/3 of the way through this book. And King of Scars is referring to Nikolai, who is now the king of Ravka. He was injured by the Darklings Nichevo, if I'm remembering correctly, if that's what they were called. The like demon spawn that he made, basically the shadow demon spawn. He was injured in battle in the Shadow and Bone trilogy, and there are still some ramifications, more than you would think, a couple years after this point. And the country in general is just hanging on by a thread. There's hope for peace, but like they've got no money, got no prospects. He's a burden to his parents. Just kidding. Ravka's like not in a healthy place, and so they're trying to form alliances, get money so they can like protect themselves. They're still like very tenuous politically and like in terms of warfare. and the implications of Jurda Parem from the Six of Crows series are brought into the King of Scars duology too. And so there's a lot going on, trying to figure out how it's all going to work out. I'm enjoying this. I love reading this right before bed, especially on my Kindle. It's just like really easy to read a chapter or two. It is YA, but it's a more mature YA, the way that the writing is. And so I appreciate it a lot more. This type of YA is my type of YA. I really don't like YA characters that act like children. So I'm really enjoying this. I'm about a third of the way through. I've got a ways to go. We'll see when I get to the second book in the duology if I start it this month or I start it next month or something, but I am thoroughly enjoying it. I do enjoy Leigh Bardugo's writing. And then my physical book that I'm working on currently is Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. I am about halfway through this book. This is the second book in a duology. The first book is called Divine Rivals, and this takes place in like a World War I era historical fantasy type of world. The two main characters, Iris and Kit, start out in Oath, which is like the big capital city or whatever. They are both trying to make it as newspaper columnists, and so they're like academic rivals. They go off to war and they're war correspondents, and you also see their relationship grow in person as they are war correspondents, but also they have magical typewriters that send letters back and forth. Kit knows that he's writing to Iris, but Iris doesn't know who she's writing to, and so she's falling in love through her typewriter, and she's falling in love in person with Kit, and she's a little confused, and then she realizes they're the same person, and it's so cute. Oh my goodness. Adorable. This prose is beautifully written, is magical. I like how this world has just like elements of magic kind of splashed throughout. The war that's happening is because of two warring gods in this world, but you're seeing this world through the eyes of two like mundane people, average people going about their lives with the impacts of these like Greek myth level gods and like the impacts that those gods have on their lives. So it's a really interesting perspective, not when you seeing someone who's not directly impacted by a god, but indirectly impacted. I really like that aspect of it. In this second book, they've been attacked and Iris is back home in Oath. Kit is captured by Dacre, which is one of the gods, and he's kind of like under his spell. He's definitely captured, but he has lost his memory. And so you're reading, trying to figure out how in the world is Kit going to remember Iris and get back to her? How is this war going to resolve? We don't really see a lot of Enva, which is the other god involved in this war. And so like things are building up. You're trying to figure out how is this gonna work out? I am loving this. I'm going slow. I'm savoring it. This is also like emotionally very charged for me. The end of the first book made me cry, made me sob. I was so tense. Like this series has made me feel so many things. It is YA, but again, it's on the more new adult side. It's definitely more mature. I love these characters. I'm a little scared for this to end, but I also really want to finish. So I'll either finish this in like 3 weeks or I'll finish this in like 2 days. So depending on how things go. I'm working a night shift tonight, so hopefully I get some time to read and I can blast through some of that because I think I will love the rest of this book. I've loved the first half so much, but I have so many questions and I'm so concerned. Oh my goodness. Divine Rivals, the first book in that duology, was my favorite book of 2023. So we'll see how Ruthless Vows stacks up. So those are all the books I've started reading that I would love to finish in February. So other books I want to read that are more based on like a time sensitive thing, like a book club or whatnot. This is The Wishing Game by Meg Schaefer. This is giving me Charlie and the Chocolate Factory or the Westing Game vibes. This girl, she's trying to make it by, but then there's a contest where an author that she loves is writing a new book, but there's only one copy, and so she, Lucy, gets entered into this contest to win this very sought after book. I'm excited to read this. It's a general fiction. I'm not sure if there's any elements of like magical realism or anything in it. I think it should be a really fun and easy read. It's not super long. It should just be a fun time. This is the book club for Poppy's Book Club. This is my local bookstore that I love in Spanish Fork. So they do 3 book clubs a month. And on the day they're doing this book club, I am not working, so I can go to this book club. So that's my plan. I'm gonna try to read this for the book club so I can participate because I've gone a few months and I absolutely love it. Another more time-sensitive book I've got is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. And what's time-sensitive about this? Barnes & Noble just released their exclusive editions of both Ninth House and Hellbent, which is the second book. And they're really pretty and have sprayed edges and they're different colored covers. And so I really want them, but I don't want to buy them unless I know that I do love the series. So I want to start reading Ninth House soon so I can justify buying the exclusive editions of the series from Barnes & Noble. That's it. I really don't know a lot about this. Someone goes off to Yale and there's some like dark academia, maybe some magic involved. I don't know. I've never read any of Leigh Bardugo's adult books, so I'm excited to get into this. I do love something that's a little bit more dark and sinister too. I do like my fun fluffy stuff, but I'm excited for the depth that should come from a book in this type of dark academia, maybe slightly magical realm. I'm excited. Another book club book that I'm going to read for my Works book club is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. This is a horror novel and involves some vampires. It sounds like it might be a funny horror novel too, like there might be some laugh out loud moments. We shall see. It's by Grady Hendrix. I have my audiobook ready to go, so as soon as I finish City of Bones, that'll probably be my next one that I read. But I'm really excited. Normally I've been working on the days where they've done their book club meetings at my work, but this time I'm not working that day. I can do brunch and book club with some work friends, so I'm really excited to be able to do that. So I really do want to participate. Another thing that's more time sensitive that I want to do a video on actually is Butcher and Blackbird. And this book is a dark comedic romance between two serial killers. And there are many trigger warnings, some of which make sense and some of them don't make sense and make me a little concerned. I hope that I find this hilarious. We shall see. Or it might be too grotesque. I feel like I'm always nervous about like dark books and then I am totally unbothered by like horror and gore and things like that. So we'll see. I think that I will enjoy this book. I've heard lots of good things about it. The reason that this is a time sensitive TBR is because Yarnaceous Fibers is doing a book box every other month and I ordered their box for February that should be sent out any day now. So it should be coming within like a week or so. And this book box is Butcher and Blackbird. So there's yarn and other goodies related to this story. And so as I get to certain page numbers within the book, I'll be able to open packages. So very similar to the Woolbury Fiber Co. Book Society box. And I really enjoyed that process, even though I really did not enjoy the book from winter. Watch my Vlogmas episode here where I did a vlog about that. But I really enjoyed being able to open that package. And so I'm excited to do it again with a different yarn dyer and to kind of see how that package differs and what I like about it. And also a good excuse to read another book and kind of join a community of people reading a similar book. I do like that community aspect. So I'm looking forward to reading that. Again, that is already in queue in my Libby. It's going to be my Kindle book after I finish King of Scars, I think. And then when I was thinking about my TBR, I realized I had a big gap. I was missing a lot of diversity, especially with February being Black History Month. I knew that I needed to do something different, and I apologize for my lack of realizing earlier on. And I don't actually have the books that I'm hoping to add on my TBR yet because this is kind of a belated realization, and I know that that's related to my unconscious bias and it's related to my white privilege as well, unfortunately. So I do apologize for that, but I do have plans to read some books by Black authors. I really want to read some romances in this month, but nothing was super catching my eye. And so I thought, let me grab a whole bunch of romances by some Black authors and I can see kind of what floats my boat and what I want to read. So I put it in order. It has not come to my house yet, but here are the 5 books that I picked. Most of them I've heard of before and that I was already intrigued by. I already had them on my like electronic TBR list of books to get to. And I really wanted to make a point to support Black authors and make time to read some books by Black authors this month. And so we'll see with these 5 romances how many I get to. But I do want to prioritize that because it is really important to lift up voices of minorities. And that's something that I haven't really made a focus in my reading before. And I want to be better about that. So I am working on it. If there are any books by Black authors that you highly recommend, leave them down below because I'd love to learn more from you guys, add more things to my TBR, and keep them on my radar. And I think that it would benefit also my followers and the people who watch this video too, to see some more recommendations for Black authors and Black books. So I'm really excited for those books to come in. I was like itching to start reading them, but I have to wait till they get mailed. So I'm waiting a little bit. I think they're coming Sunday maybe. So next week I can start reading. I'll definitely have a Black romance on my shelf that I will be reading on Valentine's Day. And then a couple other random books that I am intrigued about that I may get to. Who knows what I will get to, but I'm thinking about reading The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. I really loved The Dead Romantics. I've heard that a lot of people like this book even more. Basically, it's about this girl who's living in her aunt's apartment, and she finds out that this apartment travels back and forth between present day and 7 years in the past, and she meets the guy that is staying in the apartment 7 years ago, and so their paths are colliding, their timelines are colliding in this apartment. And so you kind of see how that relationship grows and develops. So slightly paranormal. I did really like her first book, so I'm excited to read that one. We'll see if I get to it. I did a blind date with a book from Poppy's bookstore, and I got this. It's like a YA inspired by Brothers Grimm modern urban fairy tale. This is called House of Hollow. I've never heard of this before, but I'm really excited. Its blurb on the back cover says, wonderfully creepy and full of unnerving supernatural flourishes. That sounds like me. I love that type of book. I love paranormal, creepy horrors, and this seems like this is going to be like a horror fairy tale type of thing. So I'm really excited. We'll see if I get to that anytime soon. And then let's see, because I was trying to find romances before I realized, duh, it's Black History Month. I should do some Black romances. I picked a couple romances that I was thinking maybe I would get to, but none of these are super inspiring me, so we'll see. This is The Cheat Sheet by Sarah Adams. I loved her When in Rome and Practice Makes Perfect, which is a later series. This came a little bit sooner. This is a sports romance, as you can see, like a ballet dancer and a football player. And we'll see how I like this. The second book in this series is coming out soon, so that's why I've had this on my radar, and I do want to get to this, see if I like it as much as her other books. Her other books were a closed door, fade to black type of a romance, so I'm assuming this one will be too. And we'll see how I like it. I haven't ever really read a sports romance, so I do not know how I feel about them. I'm not attracted to them at face value, but we shall see. Another sports romance I was thinking about, Icebreaker by Hannah Grace, because I do want to read the second book in this series, but I feel like I should start with the first one. And because it's February, winter's coming down to the wire, and so I feel like if I'm gonna read a hockey romance, I gotta do it in the winter time. So I threw this in. I think they're college students, so a little bit younger than I am, so we'll see how they act, if they are like mature enough for me, if they are mature enough for me, and we'll see how that goes. I've not read any of her work yet, and again, I'm not like a super fan of sports romances to begin with. I haven't really read a lot. They're not super intriguing to me, so we'll see if I get to these sports romances, and if I do, how I feel about them. The final book on my potential TBR for February is Crown of Midnight by Sarah J. Maas. This is the second book in the Throne of Glass series. So the first book didn't necessarily end on a cliffhanger, so I didn't feel like I needed to start this as ASAP as possible. But I do want to start this soon because I would love to work through all of the Throne of Glass series this year. And we'll see if I get through ACOTAR or Crescent City at all this year. But my priority is Throne of Glass. So I gotta keep working at it, especially because some of the later books are really, really long. So I'd love to read this next book, kind of continue on in the series, see what happens with Selena as she is the King's Champion and her experience as she's trying to come to terms with like earning her freedom while supporting someone that she doesn't actually support. So it should be interesting. So since I read 15 books in January, it's totally possible I could read all of these books in February, but we shall see how it goes. My overarching goal for 2024, I have 24 books on my physical TBR that I want to make sure to get through this year. So that averages 2 books a month. In January, I read Bookshops and Bonedust by Travis Baldree. That was on the list. And I also started Well Traveled by Jen DeLuca, which is the 4th book. This like contemporary romance that's set Renaissance fairs as like a big element of the story. So that's the fourth and final book of the series, at least currently at the moment. I did finish that in February already, so I already have one finished book. I'll talk about that in my next video. So I finished one book in January. I already have one done in February. City of Bones is on that list too, so I should have another one done in February. So if I read either Ninth House or 7-Year Slip, that'll be the fourth book of the year from that list of 24 books in 2024 for my physical TBR, and I'll be all caught up. So we'll see what I get to. That's really my only big reading goal. I don't have like an overarching how many books I want to read, because it doesn't matter how many books I read. I just want to keep reading and to kind of get through some of my TBR, because I have a few shelves in my closet that I've made into my TBR bookshelf, and it is overflowing. It's hard to find books. I need to tackle some of the books there. That's why I've been listening to a lot of books I have physical copies of, because I'm trying to just clear some space in my TBR. I'm also hoping to build an actual bookshelf with my husband's help, of course, because he's an engineer and he also loves doing woodworking and stuff, so he is essential to that goal. But he's going to help me build a bookshelf in our front room so I have somewhere nice to put all of my books and kind of reorganize. So that's something I hope to do this year. But my goals are just to keep reading and to explore a lot and to share that with you guys. So let me know down below what you're reading, if you have any favorite books that you read in January, or if you've read any of the books that I've mentioned here today. I would love to chat with you down below. And also don't forget, if you have any good recommendations for books by Black authors, I would also love to see that. Until next time, happy reading. Bye!